The most feared man in the city gave one simple command: bring her to me. But nobody expected that the woman who entered his room would change the way he saw power, loyalty, and humanity forever. Alessandro Moretti had built his entire life around control. At 45 years old, the White Mafia boss was known throughout the city as a man whose name carried influence before he ever spoke a word. Business leaders respected him, strangers avoided crossing his path, and those who worked with him understood one thing clearly: Alessandro never acted without a reason. His world was built on careful decisions, quiet authority, and the belief that emotions only created weaknesses. But on one ordinary evening, a message reached him that made him stop and listen. A young woman named Naomi Carter had become connected to a situation that demanded his attention. At first, Alessandro viewed it as another problem that needed to be handled. He gave a simple order to his people: bring her to me. Everyone around him assumed they knew what would happen next. They expected the cold, calculating man they had always known. They expected a conversation controlled entirely by power. But when Naomi finally entered the room, Alessandro noticed something that no report had explained. She was not the person he imagined. Naomi was a 30-year-old black woman who worked as a maid in a wealthy household. She wore a simple uniform, but her expression revealed a strength that surprised him. She looked tired, but she did not look defeated. She stood quietly, holding on to her dignity despite everything she had experienced. Alessandro had seen people try to gain his approval. He had seen people pretend to be confident because they wanted something from him. Naomi was different. She did not ask for sympathy. She did not try to explain herself with desperate words. She simply stood there with a quiet courage that made him look closer. For the first time in years, Alessandro found himself unsure of what to say. His entire life had been about finding solutions, but this was not a problem that could be solved with money or influence. It was a moment that required understanding. As he looked at Naomi, he noticed the small details others had ignored. The way she remained respectful even when she had every reason to be angry. The way she carried herself with patience despite being treated unfairly. The way she protected her own dignity when others had failed to recognize it. Alessandro had spent years believing strength came from having power over situations. But Naomi showed him a different kind of strength. The kind that remained even when someone had nothing to prove. Outside the room, the city continued moving as usual. People continued chasing status, wealth, and recognition. But inside that quiet moment, something unexpected began. The man everyone feared was seeing something he had never looked for before. Not weakness, not dependence, but courage. And Alessandro Moretti, the man who believed he understood every person he met, was about to discover that the woman everyone overlooked would become the person who changed him the most. The room had gone quiet, but Alessandro Moretti could not ignore the question that remained in his mind. Who was Naomi Carter before the world decided she was invisible? For years, the Mafia boss had surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him. They wanted his approval, his connections, or the protection that came with his name. But Naomi was different. She stood in front of him with nothing to offer except the truth of who she was. After their first meeting, Alessandro began looking into her background. Not because he wanted control, but because something about her story felt incomplete. The information he received was simple at first. Naomi was a maid working for a wealthy family. She arrived early every morning, completed her responsibilities, and rarely complained. But the more Alessandro learned, the more he realized that the simple description did not explain the woman he had met. Naomi had spent years taking care of others while quietly carrying her own struggles. She helped people without expecting recognition. She showed patience even when others showed her little kindness in return. She was the person employees trusted when they needed someone to listen, even though few people took the time to listen to her. In the large estate where she worked, Naomi was often treated as someone who could be ignored. Her opinions were rarely requested, and her efforts were rarely acknowledged. Yet she continued to work with the same dignity every day. Alessandro found himself thinking about that. He had spent his life surrounded by people who used influence to demand attention. Naomi had earned respect without demanding anything at all. Meanwhile, Naomi struggled to understand why the powerful man she had heard so many stories about seemed interested in her situation. She did not know his intentions, and she did not trust easily. Life had taught her that people with power often noticed others only when it benefited them. So she kept her distance and watched carefully. But Alessandro noticed something important. Naomi was not waiting for someone to rescue her. She was not looking for a way into his world. She simply wanted to be treated with fairness. That realization stayed with him. One evening, Alessandro visited the estate where Naomi worked. He observed quietly from a distance, watching how she interacted with everyone around her. He saw her help a new employee who was struggling, offering encouragement when she could have ignored the problem. He saw her show kindness in a place where kindness was not always returned. In that moment, Alessandro understood why her presence affected him. Naomi had something he could not buy and could not command. She had genuine character. The city knew Alessandro Moretti as a man with influence, but Naomi reminded him that true strength was not measured by how many people feared your name. It was measured by how you treated people who had nothing to give you in return. And for the first time in many years, Alessandro began questioning the rules he had lived by. The woman everyone overlooked was slowly becoming the person who made him see the world differently. Alessandro Moretti had spent years believing that every person had a price, a purpose, or a hidden reason behind their actions. In his world, trust was rare, and kindness usually came with expectations. But Naomi Carter challenged everything he thought he understood. About people, she did not seek his attention, his approval, or his protection. She simply continued living with the same quiet strength she had always carried. That was what made her impossible for him to ignore. As the days passed, Alessandro found himself learning more about the woman behind the simple uniform. Naomi had grown up understanding the value of hard work. She knew that life did not always reward fairness, but she refused to let disappointment change the way she treated others. She believed that a person's character was revealed by what they did when nobody was watching. Alessandro noticed that belief in the smallest moments. He saw how Naomi thanked everyone who helped her. He saw how she remained respectful even when people spoke to her without the same respect in return. He saw how she carried herself with a confidence that did not come from wealth or status. It came from knowing her own worth. For a man who had spent his entire life surrounded by people trying to impress him, Naomi's honesty felt unfamiliar. One afternoon, Alessandro invited Naomi to speak with him privately. The conversation was not about business, and it was not about demands. For once, he wanted to understand. Naomi was cautious at first. She had learned that powerful people often asked questions because they wanted information, not because they genuinely cared. But Alessandro surprised her. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not try to explain away her experiences. He simply allowed her to tell her story. Naomi spoke about feeling invisible in rooms where she worked every day. She spoke about the frustration of giving her best while people only noticed her when something went wrong. But she also spoke about the people who showed her kindness and the moments that reminded her there was still goodness in the world. Alessandro listened carefully. Her words stayed with him because they were not filled with anger. They were filled with honesty. He realized Naomi had every reason to become bitter, yet she chose compassion instead. That choice affected him more than he expected. Later that evening, Alessandro returned to his office and looked out at the city below. He had built an empire by understanding weakness, strategy, and influence. But Naomi had shown him something different. She had shown him that a person could experience hardship without losing their humanity. For the first time, Alessandro wondered if the life he had built was missing something important. Meanwhile, Naomi wondered why the most powerful man she had ever met seemed to care about a story nobody else wanted to hear. She still did not know what would happen next, but she recognized something changing. The distance between them was becoming smaller, not because of power, but because of understanding. And Alessandro Moretti, the man who once believed emotions were a weakness, was beginning to discover that compassion could be the greatest strength of all. The more Alessandro Moretti learned about Naomi Carter, the more he realized that the story surrounding her was incomplete. People had described her as someone who worked quietly in the background, someone who could easily be replaced or forgotten. But every moment he spent observing her revealed the opposite. Naomi was not invisible because she lacked value. She was invisible because the people around her had never taken the time to truly see her. Alessandro understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. Although the world knew him as a powerful mafia boss, very few people knew the man behind the reputation. They saw the expensive suits, the influence, and the confidence. They never saw the long nights, the difficult choices, or the loneliness that came with always being the person everyone expected to have the answers. In a strange way, Alessandro and Naomi were living opposite versions of the same reality. One had too much power, and the other had too little recognition. Yet both knew what it felt like to be misunderstood. As Alessandro continued searching for the truth about Naomi's situation, he discovered details that changed the way he viewed everything. Naomi had not simply been struggling because of circumstances. She had been carrying responsibilities that most people never noticed. She had helped others when she had very little herself. She had remained patient when others had been unfair. She had chosen kindness even when kindness was not returned. That discovery stayed with Alessandro. In his world, people often helped others because they wanted something in exchange. Naomi helped because she believed it was the right thing to do. One evening, Alessandro found Naomi sitting alone after finishing her work. The quiet moment allowed him to see another side of her. Without the expectations of others around her, she looked peaceful but thoughtful. He approached carefully, not as someone giving orders, but as someone trying to understand. Why do you keep being kind when people do not always treat you the same way? Alessandro asked. Naomi looked at him for a moment before answering. Because the way other people act does not decide who I become. Her response stayed in his mind long after the conversation ended. Alessandro had spent years believing that survival meant becoming harder than the world around him. Naomi showed him that strength could also mean keeping your heart open without losing yourself. However, not everyone around Alessandro understood why he was interested in Naomi's story. Some people questioned why a man with his responsibilities would spend time learning about someone who had no influence or status. They could not understand what he saw in her. But Alessandro knew something they did not. Naomi was not valuable because of what she could offer him. She was valuable because of who she was. For the first time in many years, Alessandro found himself respecting someone without considering their position, their connections, or their usefulness. He respected her simply as a person, and that realization marked a change he never expected. The man who had spent his life measuring everything through power was beginning to understand the importance of something far greater: dignity. Alessandro Moretti had always believed that power came with a responsibility, but for most of his life, that responsibility meant protecting his own position and maintaining control. He had built his reputation by staying distant, making careful decisions, and never allowing personal feelings to influence his judgment. But after meeting Naomi Carter, he began to question whether the way he viewed strength was truly complete. Naomi had shown him something he rarely encountered in his world. She had strength without authority, confidence without recognition, and kindness without expecting anything in return. As Alessandro continued learning about her life, he discovered that Naomi was facing challenges far beyond what he had first understood. She had spent years working hard while quietly being overlooked by people who only saw her role, not her character. Yet despite being underestimated, she continued showing patience and compassion. That was what affected Alessandro the most. He had met countless people who changed their behavior depending on who was watching. Naomi remained the same person whether she was respected or ignored. One afternoon, Alessandro visited the estate where Naomi worked and witnessed a moment that changed his perspective. A new employee was struggling with a difficult task, and instead of walking away, Naomi stopped to help. She offered guidance with a gentle smile, even though she was already carrying her own responsibilities. Alessandro watched from a distance and realized something important. Naomi did not help others because she wanted praise. She helped because it reflected the person she chose to be. That evening, Alessandro sat in his office overlooking the city. The lights below represented everything he had spent years building. Wealth, influence, and connections surrounded him. Yet he found himself thinking about a woman who had none of those things but possessed something he could not purchase: genuine character. For the first time, Alessandro wondered how many people he had ignored simply because he never looked beyond their position. Meanwhile, Naomi remained cautious. She appreciated Alessandro's interest, but she refused to let his power define her worth. She had worked too hard to become independent, and she did not want anyone to believe she needed saving. Alessandro noticed that about her. He respected that Naomi did not see him as someone who could solve every problem. She saw him as a person who had the ability to make better choices. That difference mattered. He began changing the way he approached situations around him. Instead of immediately looking for the fastest solution, he started considering how his decisions affected others. People around him noticed the difference, even if they did not understand the reason behind it. The man they knew as the cold and untouchable mafia boss was beginning to show a side they had never seen before. But Alessandro knew the truth. Naomi had not changed him by demanding anything. She had changed him simply by reminding him of something he had forgotten. Real strength was not about having the ability to control every situation. It was about having the wisdom to choose compassion when you had the power to choose anything else. Alessandro Moretti was beginning to understand that change was not something that happened in a single moment. It was built through small choices, quiet decisions, and the willingness to see things from another person's perspective. For years, the mafia boss had believed that showing emotion created uncertainty. He thought distance kept him focused, and that control protected him from disappointment. But Naomi Carter had introduced him to a different kind of strength, one that did not come from authority or influence. It came from compassion. As their conversations continued, Alessandro noticed that Naomi never tried to impress him. She never changed the way she spoke because of his reputation. She treated him with the same honesty she offered everyone else. That simple truth affected him more than he expected. In a world where many people adjusted their behavior around power, Naomi remained genuine. One morning, Alessandro asked Naomi to join him at a small community project he had recently started supporting. He wanted her opinion, not because he needed approval, but because he trusted her perspective. Naomi was surprised by the request. She had expected him to make decisions alone, as powerful people often did. Instead, he listened as she shared ideas about how the project could better support local families and workers. Alessandro paid attention to every detail. He realized Naomi saw things he often overlooked. She noticed the people behind the numbers, the stories behind the problems, and the emotions behind every decision. That day, Alessandro experienced something unfamiliar. He felt like he was learning instead of leading. For someone who had spent years being the person with all the answers, that realization was significant. However, not everyone welcomed the changes they noticed in him. Some people close to Alessandro believed he was becoming too considerate, too willing to listen, and too interested in people who had no influence. They could not understand why someone like him would care about a woman whose position in society seemed so different from his own. But Alessandro no longer viewed Naomi through the lens of status. He saw her as a person with wisdom, courage, and integrity. Naomi also began noticing the difference in him. She saw that his actions were not about gaining her trust through promises. They were about proving change through consistency. Still, she reminded herself to remain independent. She did not want to become someone's responsibility. She wanted to be respected as an equal. Alessandro admired that more than anything. He did not want Naomi to depend on his power. He respected her because she had her own strength before he ever entered her life. As the weeks passed, the distance between them continued to disappear. They came from completely different worlds, yet they discovered that understanding could exist beyond background, wealth, or reputation. Alessandro Moretti had spent years building a life where nobody could challenge his beliefs. Naomi Carter became the person who quietly did exactly that. She did not change him by force. She changed him by showing him a truth he had forgotten. The greatest measure of power is not what you can take from the world, but what you choose to give back to it. Alessandro Moretti had spent most of his life believing that people revealed their true nature when they wanted something from him. In his world, trust was rare, and every conversation had a hidden purpose. But Naomi Carter continued to surprise him because she asked for nothing. She did not seek his influence, his resources, or the opportunities that came with his name. She simply wanted fairness, respect, and the chance to live with dignity. That was exactly why Alessandro respected her more with every passing day. The city still saw him as the powerful mafia boss who could change outcomes with a single decision. But Naomi saw something others missed. She saw a person who was trying to understand himself beyond the reputation he carried. One evening, Alessandro invited Naomi to a charity event connected to the community project they had discussed. He wanted her to see the progress and share her thoughts. When they arrived, Naomi noticed something immediately. The people there were not talking about Alessandro's reputation. They were talking about the improvements he had helped create. They spoke about new opportunities, better support systems, and the feeling that someone finally cared about their struggles. Alessandro listened quietly as people shared their experiences. He did not stand in the center demanding attention. He stood among them, observing and learning. Naomi watched him carefully. She remembered the first time she met him, when he seemed like a man who believed every problem could be solved through authority. Now she saw someone different. He was still confident, still powerful, but he had become more thoughtful. Later that evening, Alessandro and Naomi walked outside the event hall. The city lights surrounded them, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. "You changed the way you look at people," Naomi said. Alessandro looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe I was looking at the wrong things before." Naomi smiled slightly. "Most people only see what is obvious. They see money, position, and reputation. They forget to look deeper." Her words stayed with him because they described exactly who he had been. Alessandro had spent years building an image that protected him from disappointment. But that same image had also kept him distant from genuine connections. Naomi had never tried to break down those walls. She simply showed him that he did not need them forever. However, their growing connection did not go unnoticed. Some people around Alessandro questioned his decisions. They believed a man in his position should focus only on power and influence. They did not understand why he gave attention to someone outside their world. Alessandro heard their opinions, but they no longer controlled his choices. He had learned that leadership was not about proving that you were stronger than everyone else. It was about recognizing the responsibility that came with having power. Naomi also realized something important. Alessandro was no longer trying to protect her because he thought she was helpless. He respected her because he recognized her strength. That difference meant everything. Their relationship was not built on one person saving another. It was built on two people learning from each other. The woman who had once been overlooked helped the most powerful man in the city see beyond appearances. And the man who once measured everything by influence discovered that true greatness came from compassion, humility, and the courage to change. The changes in Alessandro Moretti were no longer something only Naomi Carter noticed. People around him began seeing a different side of the man they had known for years. The Mafia Boss who once made decisions without hesitation was now taking time to listen, understand, and consider the impact of his choices. Some people believed it was a weakness. They thought compassion would make him lose the respect he had built over decades. But Alessandro had discovered something they did not understand. Respect earned through fear was temporary. Respect earned through trust lasted much longer. Naomi watched this transformation carefully. She knew Alessandro was still the same determined man with a strong presence and a powerful reputation. She also knew real change was not about pretending to be someone else. It was about choosing what kind of person you wanted to become. One afternoon, Naomi visited the community center that Alessandro had helped support. She saw families, workers, and young people benefiting from the opportunities created there. The place was filled with conversations, ideas, and hope. It was a completely different image from the world Alessandro had once represented. When he arrived, people did not approach him because they were afraid. They approached him because they appreciated what he had done. That moment stayed with him. For years, Alessandro had believed that his value came from what he could control. Now he was beginning to understand that his greatest impact came from what he could improve. Naomi noticed the quiet pride in his expression. She knew he was seeing the results of a different kind of leadership. "You seem surprised," Naomi said. Alessandro looked around the room and smiled slightly. "I never expected something this simple to mean so much." Naomi nodded. Sometimes the things people need most are the things that are easiest to ignore. Her words reminded him of the first time they met. Naomi had been someone everyone overlooked, yet she carried a strength that influenced everyone around her. She had never needed a title to make a difference. She had never needed recognition to do the right thing. Alessandro realized that was the quality he admired most. Meanwhile, Naomi began to see that Alessandro's actions were not temporary. He was not trying to prove something to others. He was genuinely changing the way he viewed the world. The man who once believed he had to carry every responsibility alone was learning that accepting different perspectives did not make him weaker. It made him wiser. Their connection continued growing, but it was built on something deeper than admiration. It was built on mutual respect. Naomi never forgot who she was, and Alessandro never asked her to become someone else. Instead, they encouraged each other to become better versions of themselves. As the city continued moving around them, The two people from completely different backgrounds found common ground. One had spent years searching for control. The other had spent years searching for recognition. Together, they discovered something neither expected. True strength was not found in having power over others. It was found in having the courage to understand them. And Alessandro Moretti, the man who once believed he knew everything about strength, finally learned that humility could be the greatest sign of power. Years had passed since Alessandro Moretti first realized that the world looked different. When he stopped looking only through the lens of power, the city still knew him as a man of influence, a figure whose decisions carried weight. But those closest to him noticed the greatest change was not in what he controlled. It was in what he cared about. The Mafia boss who once believed distance was the safest way to live had discovered the value of connection, trust, and compassion. Naomi Carter continued building her own future with the same determination she had always carried. She was no longer someone people overlooked. The same qualities that once went unnoticed had become the reason others respected her. Her kindness, patience, and courage inspired the people around her, not because she demanded attention, but because she earned it through the way she treated everyone. Alessandro admired that more than anything. He knew Naomi had never needed his name to create her own place in the world. She had done that through her own strength long before he met her. One evening, Alessandro and Naomi returned to the community center where their journey of understanding had grown deeper. The building was filled with familiar faces, people who had benefited from the opportunities created there. Children laughed, workers shared stories, and families gathered together. Alessandro stood quietly, taking in the scene. He remembered the man he used to be, the man who believed success was measured only by influence and reputation. He realized how much had changed. Naomi walked beside him and smiled. "You look like you are thinking about something important." Alessandro looked around before answering. "I was thinking about how wrong I was about strength." Naomi listened carefully. "What do you mean?" He looked at her and said, "I thought strength meant never needing anyone and always being in control. But I learned that strength is also knowing when to listen and when to care." Naomi smiled because she knew those words represented a transformation that could not be forced. Alessandro had changed because he chose to change. Their connection was never about one person saving another. It was about two people from different worlds teaching each other something valuable. Naomi reminded Alessandro that humanity mattered more than reputation. Alessandro reminded Naomi that she deserved to be seen and respected, not because of what she could do for others, but because of who she was. As the evening lights covered the city, they stood together watching the world continue moving around them. The city would always remember Alessandro Moretti as a powerful man, but the people who truly knew him remembered something more important. They remembered the man who learned that compassion was not a weakness. It was a choice. Naomi Carter had once been someone many people ignored, but her quiet strength changed the perspective of the person everyone thought could never change. And Alessandro Moretti, the man who once measured everything by power, finally understood a truth that would stay with him forever. The greatest influence a person can have is not the ability to make others fear them. It is the ability to make others feel valued. That was the lesson he carried forward, and that was the moment the world saw what true dignity and humanity looked like.